Chapter 8, Section 4, we're going to get into the beginning of John Adams' presidency. We left off with the end of Section 3, where Washington was offering his advice in his farewell address to stay out of European affairs, and that's really where we're going to pick up for the most part. But we're going to examine, first of all, that election of 1796, which pits Thomas Jefferson, former Secretary of State and founder of the Republican Party, against the former Vice President John Adams of the Federalist Party. These two guys absolutely despised each other and would issue or bring in mudslinging campaigns, as this would be one of the most notoriously nasty and dirty campaigns in American history. There you see the results. Very close election where John Adams and the Federalist would come out on top. But notice that you had most of the northern states supporting the Federalist and the majority of the southern states supporting the Republican Party, which is kind of not a surprise, knowing that the Republicans were favored by farmers from their agricultural economic standpoint. So we have John Adams as our second president of the Federalist Party, as we discussed, and Thomas Jefferson, the Republican, as vice president. Kind of ironic that you would have two guys from opposite parties sharing an office. And the way the Constitution was set up was that you had the runner-up in the presidential election would become the vice president. So we have, for the first and only time in our country, a president and a vice president of different political parties. Congress would recognize this awkward situation, pass the 12th Amendment, which then started two separate elections for president and vice president in the Electoral College like we have today. Just like we were divided over politics and political parties, our nation is divided on who we support as far as allies. We had a section that were devoted to France and that alliance. We had one group that was devoted to Great Britain and promoting relationships with Great Britain through trade. And we had one group that supported George Washington in his ideas of neutrality. But soon, some actions of the French government would lead all three of those to side together. France had been upset when they found out that we had negotiated Jay's Treaty with Great Britain. They felt like we had stabbed them in the back and gone back on our alliance with them. And so they began to seize American ships, steal cargo, and just basically open fire on any American ship they see on the open seas. They saw our treaty with Great Britain as a violation of our previous treaty with France in 1778. And so Americans now, with the French openly shooting and firing at our ships, all united together in the fact that France needs to be stopped. Adams, however, sends diplomats to Paris to negotiate a treaty, just as Washington did with Great Britain, because they both recognize that our country is not ready for war. The French foreign minister, however, refuses to meet with the Americans directly. Charles Talleyrand, he sends 3 agents secretly to meet with the American diplomats, and these guys are later identified as X, Y, and Z, and that gives us the name the XYZ affair. These agents say that Talleyrand wants $250,000 up front just to have a discussion, and then any deal would constitute a $10 million loan to France. The Americans are angered. They return home. They tell Adams all about it, who tells Congress. Pretty soon it gets public, and Americans are outraged. They say millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. In other words, we'll pay whatever it takes to defend our country against attacks, but we're not going to pay someone to not attack us. That's not how we do things. And so this further ignites war fever, the exact opposite of what Adams wanted. So he refuses to ask Congress to declare war. He wants to follow Washington's advice and keep America out of European affairs. Our government began to build frigates. We formed the Department of the Navy to defend against the French attack, and we pay for this by expanding taxes. Pretty ironic from a country who went to war over taxes with Great Britain. And here is a picture of one of those frigates, those ships that would be the first ships of our U.S. Navy. The Federalists would capitalize on this newfound unity amongst the American people. Anytime the American country is attacked by a foreign power, everyone is united in opposition against them, and the Federalists took advantage. They passed the Alien Act, which gave the president the power to expel any foreigner that is thought to be dangerous to our country. A lot of power for one man. They also passed the Naturalization Act, so that any foreign person had to wait 14 years to become a citizen. Previously, this law had been 5 years, but they changed it to 14, which is a very long period of time. This specifically targeted immigrants who came over to America from other countries. These guys typically supported the Republican Party, and so passing this law, making it a longer waiting period, would give the Federalists 9 more years of voting for their support. But most notably, they passed the Sedition Act, and there you see the definition of sedition. Anyone could be fined or jailed if they criticized the government openly. This specifically hurt Republicans because they were outspoken against the president who was in power. And any newspaper editors who published things against the government were arrested and fined. This is a clear violation of First Amendment rights, which you see here. Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of free speech or against the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So you can see this is a clear violation of First Amendment constitutional rights. This is a big deal to 2 states in particular, Virginia and Kentucky. They had supported Jefferson in the election, and representatives from Virginia, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, they write up these 2 resolutions declaring that the Sedition Acts are unconstitutional, which clearly they are, but the state does not really have this power, or at least they've never done it before. They mention that it doesn't say in the Constitution they can't nullify laws, so they try to do this. This threatened the Union if it became widespread and other states began to nullify these laws or other laws, but however, it does not catch on. This is the only resolutions from these 2 states that pass and declare any federal laws unconstitutional. It's a very fine line. This is evidence of the further division of our country and foreshadowing of the trouble coming. The fast approaching presidential election of 1800 would decide the balance of power between federal government and state government for a very, very long time. That's going to wrap up Section 4 and all of Chapter 8